changing the conversation over to the kind of more financial side, which you're an expert on when it comes to North Carolina and the athletic department. I think me and AJ's tone has almost shifted a little bit because we spent a lot of time in the preseason talking about you don't spend X amount of money on the football program and give Bill Belichick this massive contract to come in and maybe win in a few years. We'll build for the future. And again, that's even more difficult to do now with the transfer portal and NIL and trying to build a roster over a couple season period it just doesn't really happen as much anymore because people get up and go somewhere else or get offered to play, make more money somewhere else and decide to transfer. So what is your opinion on how the season outlook with the team and just the sheer amount of money that has been backed into the program? Because I think there's some people that say you hire Bill Belichick, he's won that many Super Bowls, arguably the greatest coach of all time. You kind of want to win now instead of potentially maybe winning in a couple years. So how do you look at that when you look at what this team is versus the amount of, again, financial backing that the football program has received since Belichick came in?
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, I think for the administrators, you'd be 11-1 and fighting for an ACC title berth, or a game in the championship game, and maybe a CFP. I think we understand how unrealistic maybe that is, but I think some of the spending is just to get UNC up to kind of a baseline, right? Yeah. To prove that you're invested in this, and it's not to me, it's not just the spending on Belichick and revenue sharing and all that, but it is the Chapel thrill, right? Turning campus. I said this on air one day. You put nothing shows your commitment to football like putting a concert venue, like a stage, right in front of the Wilson Library, right? Nothing says we're all in on football that we're going to have a pregame party right in front of our most important academic building on campus. They turned that entire quad into a tailgating scene. Now, will it kind of duplicate from game to game to game? We'll see, but they are investing in football in a way, and not just Belichick's salary and revenue sharing, but everything, facilities, the administration, like everybody's on board with this. And I think so some of that spending is just to get you to a baseline. I don't know that it, certainly this season, you've gotten, I think it's worked. In some ways, it's already worked. You've sold out of your season tickets. Sponsorships are out. There were State Farm logos on the field. Like, you're getting some of that return on investment already. You added more premium seats with the terraces at the Blue Zone and the Keenan Skybox. Like, you've got the conversation about Carolina football. So in some ways, it's really worked. The next part, and maybe the last part, is does it work on the field? Does it elevate the brand on the field? But in many ways, I think it has elevated the importance of football on campus and certainly to the administration.
Brian, you talk to a lot of the same people I do. We've been in some of those same conversations, in fact. And the commitment to doing this, to really dramatically changing the landscape, was there before Belichick was on their radar. And I think that's what makes this a perfect marriage, even if he doesn't succeed on the field, because of what's left over for the next guy. And I think and Carolina as well as anybody about the culture and everything. One of the things they've defeated is the pushback culture on campus. And we're going to see that, where you're going to see more changes at Keenan. You're going to see stuff done to when you walk into the concourse and you look around and you say, yeah, football matters here. Because I think you can argue on the concourse, it doesn't look like it matters right now. And that's a timing thing that's going to happen over time. The investment's there. And I think going with Belichick wasn't like going, well, we're paying Mac this, so we're going to pay this guy this. They had already done everything else and committed to everything else. And let's lop on this much more money to get this guy, to get Lombardi, to get the entire infrastructure that they demand. And they did it. So even if it doesn't work on the field and he's gone in 2 or 3 years, whoever the next coach is that comes in, his baseline is so dramatically higher than it would have been without making this higher, that I think it makes Carolina a more immediate player. And they're positioning themselves to either be financially and organizationally dominant in the ACC with the right hire, or if they have to move over to the SEC or Big Ten, their infrastructure and competing financially is there right away.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the subtext of all of this, right? Yeah. The next round of realignment is coming in 2030, 2031, maybe sooner, maybe later, but it's coming, and we all know it's coming. And I think a lot of this is about putting yourself in the best position to make that move, and we all think Carolina will have opportunities if they want to make that move. But then when you make that move, be competitive. You don't want to go to whether it's the SEC or the Big Ten and be Maryland. Just be an afterthought in the league. And that's not a knock on Maryland, but they're not competing for Big Ten titles. You don't want to be Kentucky in football where you're just middle of the pack or even worse. And so I think a lot of this is like positioning yourself for the next move. I think Lee Roberts deserves, credit or blame. You decide which he deserves, but I think he has moved the needle in this area and in this department. And I think you're right. Like, you could have hired Tommy Rees or Jeff Monken or John Summerall and committed the same amount of money, but it would have had less of an impact.
Yeah.
Because Bill Belichick is just going to, they care about football. I mean, you could have hired one of those guys and put the same commitment in. I'm not sure you would have gotten the same conversation that, Carolina cares about football. But by hiring Belichick and doing all those things, I think you've changed the narrative at least a little bit about how much you're willing to invest and how much you care about football.
I think you're right. I think they're showing that there's an appetite. Because they hired Butch Davis. I was at his introductory press conference. I was told that Dick Vidor, the first time he ever met Butch Davis was when he introduced him on that stage. But they didn't follow up with the rest of the investment. They let him design the Blue Zone, which, say what you will about the Blue Zone, but that was not the investment they needed to make at the time. They go get MAC Part 2. I've seen the numbers. I ran a story last year on the numbers. Mac got considerably more money than Larry got, but it wasn't nearly enough, which is why Mac was on the phone all the time trying to raise money for NIL, which is an area he struggled. Now all of that is there. And on top of it, there could be more money coming. I want you to explain to me, like I'm in first grade, what the gambling revenue that you've written about that NC State and Carolina can get, how that affects the university, how that plays out, and please do it like I just had my first day of first grade.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, no problem. If you see me looking off to the side, I got spreadsheets upon spreadsheets, so I'm going to reference those a little bit. So let's start at the beginning, right? Sports gambling launched in the state in March of 2024, and tax revenue, whatever the sports gambling operators make, they get taxed at 18%. That money goes in part to get the votes that they needed to pass this thing. That money goes to 13 UNC system schools. I mean, it goes to other places too, but a percentage of that goes to 13 UNC system schools. That's everyone that has a college intercollegiate athletics department except NC State and North Carolina. So the other schools have made about $2 million already, and they're making more every month. We're talking about, by the time September is over, there will be more than $10 billion bet on sports in the state in 18 months. Wow. So the little bit of politics here, the House and the Senate put their own budget proposals out there. And in each of those budget proposals, the House and the Senate said, okay, it's time to give Carolina and State some of this money. So they rewrote those distribution formulas. The House would give UNC and NC State the same amount as Charlotte, ECU, and App State. Based on their numbers, they would keep the tax rate at 18%. And those schools would get about $12 million a year, or the first year, up to $14 million in the second year. That's considerably more than schools like Greensboro and Asheville and Wilmington, which are at about $3.5 million. So they're upping the distribution to all the schools and including NC State and North Carolina. The Senate's proposal would double that tax rate to 36%. I don't think that's going to happen, but that's what their proposal would do. So, of course, now you've got double the amount of money to play with. Their formula heavily weighs the money to NC State and UNC. Under their formula and their proposal, those schools will get $24 million in this fiscal year, up to $31 million in the next fiscal year, and then continue to grow as sports gambling grows. The other G5 schools that play football would get $5.3 million. The other schools that are Division I and don't play in the FBS would get about $4.8 million. So it's a dramatically weighed towards NC State and UNC. Obviously, you've got $20 million in revenue sharing right now. Under the Senate proposal, that would be all taken care of with gambling money. It would be a huge down payment on athletics competition for both NC State and UNC. Now, the House and the Senate both passed those bills. They have not agreed on a compromise budget. There is no budget for the state of North Carolina. So right now, for this month and next month, and until they pass a budget, UNC and NC State are getting 0% of the revenue from sports gambling.
But at some point, it's going to be there.
Yeah.
And you and I have been in some of those conversations. I think the clear mission, and you don't hire Steve Newmark without being part of your mission. They want to be the financially preeminent school in this league. And if they move to the SEC or Big Ten, they want to be at the top tier there immediately as well. I think that's what's being positioned. And I think that's part of why this is happening. I mean, even NC State, if they get left out, they'll still be a big money player wherever they settle, whether it's the Big 12 or whatever the ACC still is, if, of course, Carolina leads, or State's going to be dramatically more competitive from a financial level moving forward as well. So it helps both. And I actually think, I'm a believer, sidebar here for a moment, that NC State being competitive is good for North Carolina. I really believe that, and I believe Carolina being competitive is good for State. Just like in basketball, Duke and Carolina help each other. I think the more important football is in this state, the better those two programs benefit from attention and everything else across the board in the state.
Yeah, I mean, I talked to Bubba Cunningham and said, it looks like your budget is going to be $200 million here either next year or the year after. And he said, well, there are ACC schools where that number starts with a 3. So, like, as much as UNC is investing in these programs, Clemson and Florida State aren't stopping their investment. They're going up as well. I think I'm very interested to see what happens at a school like Virginia Tech, where their AD laid it out to their boards and said, look, we don't have enough money to compete in the ACC, and we're going to get further and further left behind. It's up to you guys. Invest in us, and we'll see what happens at Virginia Tech. So this conversation is happening all across the ACC and all across the country.
Well, and I know this is football, but the basketball decision with the arena is going to affect football. So, and you know what they want to do, and you know what some of the numbers look like if it works out if it works out the way that they would like for it to. That would be another boon. I think if that happens, everything works out, the financing works out the way that they would like for it to work out, they might be one of those programs in the 3s.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't think we're talking at a school. I've reported on this, and they'd like to put that the building at Carolina North, in part because you can get private investment to help you build that. I mean, I've reported a lot on what's happening around the Lenovo Center here in Raleigh, where the Hurricanes play. We're talking about $1 billion investment and building that out. I mean, I often say sports is not sports. Sports is real estate. That's what it's turned into. And if you can put an arena at Carolina North with all the trappings around it and generate revenue off those other things, off entertainment options, food, bar and restaurant, all that stuff, housing even, then you're ahead of the game. And that's what all sports are turning into. Look at all the professional sports. They were all developing areas around their arena because you want to bring in more money when you're not playing sports.